First, let's make a new document, File, New, and we're going to make it 11 by 14 or 14 by 11, depending on if you think you'll make it horizontal or vertical. It's also fine to make it a different proportion. Like my example is going to be a little bit more square, you'll see, as long as it's large and high resolution. That's the important thing. For the resolution, 300 is generally considered print resolution, but I'm going to make it 360 pixels per inch because that's the ideal resolution for our output center to make prints while you're here at CIA. For color mode, I'm going to choose RGB if it's not already. And then underneath where it says advanced options, I'm going to click that little triangle if it's not open already. And instead of sRGB, which is general RGB, red, green, and blue color mode for screens, we're going to choose Adobe RGB 1998 because it has a wider gamut or range of reproducible colors. And create. Next, it's very important that you use some sort of drawing implement, something pencil-like. That can include a Wacom tablet. They have Wacom tablets in the Equipment Checkout Center at CIA. You could use a Surface tablet and the stylus that they have, and you can use an iPad Pro or other iPads that work with the Apple Pencil. In the modern operating system for the Mac, you can go to here, the little TV icon at the top, go to my iPad Pro, and then I want to choose also, I want to make sure it says mirror built-in Retina display. If it mirrors the display, that means I have the entire Photoshop display from my Mac on my iPad. Also, there are large Cintiq tablets that you can draw right on the screen, and those are in the hallways in CIA, and you can use those too, although you do have to check out the stylus from the checkout center. But do make sure that you have something tablet-like to draw with. Don't try to draw with a mouse or a trackpad. Virtually every project in the class involves drawing or painting, and you're just not going to want to have no drawing implement. Okay, so make sure that you, at very least, have a Wacom tablet that you check out from the checkout center, the equipment center, to do the projects. So the first thing we do is a gesture drawing. So a gesture drawing is really quick and lively. So it's mapping out the basic shapes and the basic composition. So the idea is you see how the shapes relate to each other, and you can create the composition, and also the quick visual movement will introduce a liveliness. And even if the gesture drawing isn't showing in the finished project, then it'll still maintain some of the liveliness that you've mapped out in the gesture composition. Okay, so for the gesture, we want to make a new layer over here, the little plus sign at the bottom of the layers panel. Click, and we will call it gesture. Be sure to make a new layer because we don't want to draw on the background layer, so we'll have white pixels in the background. We want it to be transparent except for the lines we're drawing, so we can control it separately more easily. Now, the next thing we want to do is go over here when we have the brush tool selected. Remember, when we select a tool, all the options up here are related to that tool. So it's contextual, right? So we click the brush tool, and then over here, we can adjust the size of the brush, and we want a pretty small brush. I have about 19 pixels for mine, and hardness, 100%. I'm picking hard round brush. In fact, a lot of my painting is going to be using this hard round brush, and I think that's by far the most common brush used in a lot of work, although we are going to use some texture brushes as well. Make sure not to do a blurry brush. The soft round and the hard round brush are basically the same brush except for the hardness. Do you see how it says 0 hardness? So it would be blurry if we're painting with it. but we want hard round, so it's a solid line, okay? Also, opacity, which is transparency. I want it to be 100% opaque, not transparent at all, and I'll just use black as the color. This is the color picker, and we'll pick black. By the way, one way to pick a grayscale is to go up this left side of the color picker. See, so you can see if you watch the little new thing here, you'll watch it get darker, but always staying in grayscale, right, until we get all the way black. So I'm going to show you swatches in a minute when we start painting in the grayscale values. But this is another way to pick your gray color. If you're painting with this color and you wish that it was just a little bit darker, you can do that, hit OK, and start painting. But we want solid black, and we're going to start mapping out the basic composition. Okay, so we're going to start mapping it out, and also mapping out the values. Okay, so I can see that I can see where the dark areas are in the shadows, so I'll start mapping that out too. So now we're going to do a contour drawing. You might have had this in drawing already along with gesture. So gesture, where it's a quick thing to capture some visual movement, the basic shapes, map in the darks and lights, and capture a lot of visual movement and the basic composition of things. Contour is almost the opposite. It's careful observation. So as your eye moves along the object, then slowly you're recording that line as best you possibly can. The contour drawing is probably more important in things that aren't such general shapes, things that have a little bit more delicacy to them, but we're going to go ahead and do the contour drawing for this one too. And also I might end up using some of the contour lines in the finished composition. So I'm adding a new layer, hitting the little plus, and I'll call it contour, and it's on top of the gesture layer, and I'm selecting gesture, and I'm going to make the opacity, how opaque it is or transparent, and I'm going to reduce the transparency to about 21%. So it's grayed out, but I can still see it and use it as a reference for my contour drawing. Okay, now I'm selecting the contour layer, making sure I select the right layer, and then I have a brush tool, 12 points, hard round. We're still just drawing like with a pencil, right? And black as the color. And I'm just drawing. I'm drawing in the stem. And basically I'm following the contour of the actual object as much as possible. So we're drawing slow, and I'm moving my eye over the still life. So I'm moving my eye over the object slowly, and my hand is moving the same speed as my eye. For this, because I'm really trying to get an idea of the actual shapes. Okay. So this, we really just want to try to get the actual shapes to use as a guide to paint. Again, the other one is capturing some visual movement. But this is about the actual shapes. Okay, this is just finishing up. Okay, so once we've got the contour drawing down, then we're ready to start applying the basic colors and basic shapes. So I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to do basic grays. I might rename that something else. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the background, the table, the box, and the grapes, the basic shapes of the grapes, all on one layer. And then I'm going to keep each fruit separate, and I'm also going to keep separate layers for the little highlights I'm going to give them using a textural brush, is so I can control them separately. Basically, I want to be able to use a textured brush and create them with one little dab, so I can be like, no, that didn't work, and redo or erase or contribute more to them if needed. And the more separate layers you have, the more control you have over individual things. So speaking as a physical painter, or really any kind of visual artist, working with a blank canvas or a blank piece of paper is the most intimidating thing in the world. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by painting in the background. I'm going to create like a neutral gray color. Okay, so again, we could go over here and create a color. Or the other way is to go to the swatches over here. And if you don't see the swatches as a shortcut, you can go to Window, Swatches. Every single panel is under Window. So if you're new and you don't know what the shortcut is, or you can't find a panel, just go to Window and it's there. So here's the swatches, and under here is grayscale. And if you click on grayscale, you can see there's 20 grayscale steps in 5% increments. So it's 0%, which is white, 5%, 10%, 15%, etc. So these exactly correspond to the 20-step grayscale guide that I gave you. So you can use that as a reference, and if you're holding it up in front of your still life and you're saying, okay, this is about an 80%, it's over here, then you can just choose that swatch and use that as the basis to paint with. So I'm going to go over here to the color picker, and I'm going to pick a color, kind of a medium to light gray, and I'm going to just paint in, I'm going to make it really big. So things will be a lot less, that's too dark, I think. That looks pretty good. So I'm painting in the background, okay? And I'm making sure that I'm on a new layer and not painting over my contours, right? Because if it's on a new layer, I can be like, oh, I covered up my line, so I'm gonna erase that. But basically the idea is to create a solid background, and then we're going to add a little bit to it. Okay, so once I've mapped in that background color, and of course I could have masked this off and done a fill, which we'll do later in this demo when I paint my orange, but I just like covering it up like I would a canvas. And then I can kind of also make some decisions and kind of straighten out some of the weirdness or bumpiness or inconsistencies of my drawing too. Help to define them already. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to make a big brush, maybe even bigger than that. We'll see how this goes. And then this time I'm going to pick a soft round, because if I pick a soft round and I'm going to adjust the opacity of my actual brush, my transparency, and I'm going to make a darker color. This will be an experiment too. And then what I'm doing is I'm just pressing down and I'm trying to make equivalent of a gradient, a little smooth area, and just to add a little bit more depth. Okay, so one way to make smooth blended strokes is to paint with a big, giant, blurry brush. And then I can also, if I hold down the Option key or Alt key on a Windows machine, it turns into the eyedropper, and I can go click, and I can also use that color and paint back into it and kind of shape my gradient a little bit better. And if it's not subtle enough, just adjust the opacity, right? The more transparent it is, the smaller the number for opacity, the more subtle the blend is. Okay. So one thing that my painting teacher told me was macro to micro, big to little. So map in all the basic areas first and then go into the details. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I wanted to show you two more things on the bottom layer. One, I did lie to you. I made it into two layers instead of one layer. I made the gray background into a separate layer. You can see it disappear there. And then I made the bottom with the box and the grapes into a separate layer just to give me a little bit more control and so I could clean up the edges a little better. So when I wanted to make these straight edges over here, you can see my little painterliness with my textural brush. So I'm going to make this one now. So we want to use the polygonal lasso. So I'll go click, 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 click. And I've chosen a medium gray that I've used in these others also as the basis, and I can go edit, fill, you could paint it in also, but foreground color, and it paints with the color that I have chosen, and I hit OK, and now it's just a generic flat gray strip. Now I'm going to pick the brush tool again, and I'm going to go, instead of hard round, which is my standard go-to brush, I'm going to go into dry media brushes, and I've been using this one, Kyle's Ultimate Pastel Palooza, or Chunky Charcoal. So I think I'm going to try first the Chunky Charcoal, and you can see it shows you kind of the texture of the brush. So now, when I start painting into it, I'm going to make a darker color. Okay, and that's too dark, I can tell. Darker color, lighter color. I'm going to make it semi-transparent, and I'm also going to adjust the flow so it takes a little bit more effort to start it. Yeah, that's more subtle. That's good. Okay, and I'm just painting in a texture here, and I'm going to sample the light part and go back into it so it's not so, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, so there's I'm going to go down here too because I can see a little reflection, a little bounce off light, and I want to capture that. Okay, and then I'm going to make it a little bit darker, keeping it semi-transparent, right, so I can be more subtle. And if I press this button, that keeps it pressure sensitive, so I can vary the pressure a little bit, make it a little darker. You're constantly kind of reacting and seeing what's too much and what's not enough. Okay, so basically I'm just I'm adding a little bit of texture over here, and you can have fun, you know, with all the little splatter brushes and kind of brush brush in stuff, and then you can see I want a little bit more. Looks a little spotty up here. Okay. So anyway, you can mask off any hard edges and then only paint within the edges. And you can use Edit Fill to get in a basic shape and then add a little bit more in terms of texture. And I think that's a good way of constructing the box. And the other thing is, I'm going to add a plus, new layer, and I'm going to call this Grape Highlights. And on the Grape Highlights layer, I'm going to add some highlights to the grapes and give them a little bit more definition. And I'm going to use the same, maybe I'll use the Ultimate brush, but I'll make it really small. And I'm zooming in. There we go. And on the brushes, I think I'm going to pick white, but then make it semi-transparent. And I'm going to see how it goes. And I'm going to add some highlights to the grapes. And I have it on white, but I also have it on semi-transparent because I don't want it to be too distracting. Give it a little bit of little highlights. And I'm looking to, this could use a little more. Make it a little, I'm even going to try to define a few grapes that aren't really there. If I wanted to, if I had made adjustments here to the brush, I could save it. If I hit this little plus, I can create a new brush based on that brush and any changes I made. And I could call it something specific. Scott Kyle's Spatter. Now I'm going to create some new layers for each of the fruit and paint in the fruit. And I'll show you all the way through one of those. Okay, so now we're ready to paint in some individual fruit. So I'm going to make some of these other layers go off, and I'm going to make the gesture layer visible again. So let's paint an orange. So I'm going to create a separate layer, layer new, down at the bottom of the layers panel. And I'm going to call this one Orange 2. And I'm going to keep each of the fruits on a separate layer. I'm going to keep each of the oranges, the banana, and the apples on a separate layer, and that way I have individual control over the items. Be sure and add as many different layers as you want to keep control over individual elements. So again, making sure I have my orange layer selected. If I have contour or gesture selected, then I just replace the pixels of my drawing, and I don't want to do that yet. I'm going to create a mask around my orange, and you could also use the regular lasso tool with your tablet and draw it in, but I find it easier to do this and then smooth it out a little bit using the polygonal lasso tool. And you also don't even have to make a selection. You could just paint it in with a big brush. But now I've made a selection mask, and I'm going to go to the Select and Mask, and I'm going to smooth the mask so it's a little less angular where I made the individual points. And I will not feather it at all. I'll hit OK. So now I have a pretty good mask. So this time, I'm going to map in the color. So I've already kind of sketched it out in my gesture layer. So here's my gesture layer, and you can see just the contour layer here too. Okay, so Gesture and contour. Make sure the orange layer is selected. One thing I always do is draw in something really nice and discover it's on the wrong layer, so I've messed up something else. So you have to be really careful you're on the layer that you want to be when you're painting. I'm going to take a neutral gray. Where's my swatches? I'm going to make it about a 50% gray. Let's see, maybe here. Okay, then I'm going to go edit fill, foreground color, and hit OK. And I made a fill. Now I still want to see my little sketch. So in the layers, I'm going to make this slightly transparent so I can still see what I'm doing. And I'm going to try to match. I'm doing the color picker instead of swatches this time. I'm trying to match the value of the dark areas of my orange. And I'll hit OK. And this time I'm going to make a new layer just for the dark. I'm not going to label it because I'm about to merge it, but I want this one to be 100% and the other one to be more transparent so I can still see my underpainting, my sketch, my gesture sketch. So I'm going to make my brush larger, and I'm going to pick a hard round brush, hardness all the way at 100%, and yeah, 90% could be good. And if I make the opacity a bit transparent, and the flow is like how much wet paint do you have on your brush, basically. Oh, by the way, I could do a soft round brush. See, now you see hardness went to 0%, and I could sketch in. See, so I'm painting with a really big brush, and I could make a smoother airbrushed effect, right? But I don't want it to be so blurry. I'm going to give it a little bit more character than that. So I'm going to retrace my steps in history. Here's my history panel. And now I'm going to use the hard round brush. See, it's 100% hardness, and still keep it kind of transparent. You can make it real transparent and then build your way up gradually. But for this, I'm going to keep it maybe a little over halfway, and I'm going to sketch in. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to have a little character and show the strokes. I'm still mapping in the dark part first, so it might almost be exactly the same effect. Make it a little more transparent, and I'm brushing in, and I can see that there's a little bit of reflection from the table, a little bit of light on the edge. So I'm going to make my brush quite a bit lighter, and I'm going to go over the edge here. I'm going to hold the Option key down so it turns into an eyedropper sample, and now I'm painting with the darker paint. I'm blending in. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and increase the opacity, select this layer, and do layer merge down. So now they're both on the orange 2 layer. Okay? And I can make this transparent if I want to look back at my sketch and see where the little details are. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller than that. And I'm going to start mapping in some of the highlights using a highlight color area where the navel is. Okay, so I'm going to map out where it is. Let's see. Got it in about the same place. And one of the things that's nice about having your fruit on another layer also is I can lock the layer transparency, and then I can't color outside of the lines. So I've already painted in the basics of my orange, and then I can, if I don't have the lock on, if I have a giant brush and I'm painting, then I paint right outside the lines, right? Undo, or Command Z. And then if I lock it, then I can't paint outside of the lines, only inside the lines. Right? So it's just the same as masking it, basically. Now I'm going to make a separate layer for the details, especially the little stem part over there. But I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to call it stem. I'm an artist, not a biologist. So anyway, stem, sorry. Make sure the right layer is selected. Zooming in. This time I want a pretty small brush, and definitely hard edges, and maybe not very opaque. I mean, not very transparent, rather. And make it even smaller. So now I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make that a lot darker. As long as you stay on this left side, your grayscale, dark to light, in the color picker. So then I'm going to make a new layer specifically for the reflection, because I'm going to select a textured brush, reflection orange 2, and it'll either work immediately or it'll not work as well. So I'm going to select the brush, try it once, and see if it works, and if it doesn't, I'll try it again. So I want to keep it on a separate layer to keep separate control over it. And the brush I'm going to choose, Kyle Bonus Chunky Charcoal. And I'm going to go over here. It's big. And I'm going to make it 100% opacity, maybe just like, I'll try like 75. So this is going to be trial and error. And I'm going to select completely white. And that's pretty good. And then I'm going to try making it small, going around the edges, getting a little bit of extra texture. And that way, it kind of alludes to the texture of the orange. So once we've created all the other fruit on separate layers, then I'm going to make the gesture layer invisible. We just use that for reference. And I'm going to make all of the fruit layers visible. In fact, just all of the layers in general. And then I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to take the contour layer and I'm going to bring it all the way up to the top. And I'm going to make it about 12% opacity, barely there, but you'll still be able to see a little bit of character in some of the lines. And if I wanted to, I could go in and erase some of the lines and keep some of the other lines. In fact, I'm going to erase one thing that I see, this line here on the grape. That's messing with me. I don't mind this line. I like the line in the banana that's showing up. I don't mind the sketchy lines in the orange, gives it a little bit of character. But the line in the grape is kind of taking me out of the picture, so I'm going to use an eraser. And then I'm just going to erase, making sure the contour layer is the one that's selected. And there's a still life. Now, one other thing to remember, pixels are pixels, and Photoshop doesn't care if it's paint or if it's photographic pixels. You can still use all the image adjustments that you use for photographs. So I've selected the main orange layer, right, with most of the painting on it, and I'm going to go to Image Adjustments, and I'm going to pick Levels. All of the stuff, these first four are all about value, dark to light, and then this is all about color, right? And you always adjust value before color, because when you change the value, it alters the color, right? So adjust the value first, and then adjust the color to get it exactly where you want it. Okay, so in our case, we just want levels, and here's the slider for darks, mid-range, and light. And what I want to do is mess with the mid-range a little bit and maybe lighten it up slightly, okay? Because I can see I want it to fit in a little bit more with my grapes and my box. And so I'm altering that, and here's like before and after. And I think that looks like that'll work a little bit more. So I'll hit OK, and Photoshop redraws the pixels. And we used image adjustments to influence our work. So if something is too dark or too light, you can modify it that way.